want to mention that I'm pregnant, so I might be getting up to pee and drink water during this thing.
Don't worry about it.
Cool.
Is the little bench gone?
Yes, but I'm finally kind of.
I'm telling you another one.
Yeah, it's always good to have a bench. It's kind of the second most comfortable way to sit seiza, right? The first, if you can, first most comfortable if you can do it is just this, right? That feels kind of awesome, but it's really easy to have your legs fall asleep, which is difficult. But it's interesting that changes over time. I can now sit that way for somewhere between half hour and 45 minutes without my legs going to sleep. I'm not sure why.
So mechanical.
I know. Tell me about it. Right? Yeah, I know. But no, it really is true, and it's still not good enough to accommodate, for example, a formal tea ceremony where you do it for hours, right? But yeah, and the trick is that I was invited to have tea at the Urasenke Society in North Beach because a kind of friend and student of mine was a regular student there as well, and so she wanted to serve me tea, which was awesome. But I sat seiza for about 3 hours, and it just really put everything to sleep, right? But what you notice is that the real regulars, they walk in and they reach in their kimono sleeve and they pull out this little tiny bench. It's about this big, and they unfold it and stuff it under their sit bones, and it gives just enough lift, like probably 3 centimeters of lift, right? But it's enough to keep their legs from falling asleep. And so they sit there the entire time like, oh, this tea is really good. Where's it from? And I was like, whoa. Anyway. Well, welcome. It's great to see you. So we're going to sit for a while, I think, today. It'd be good to get some sitting in. So in honor of that, let's get everything settled. So sort of scanning from the knees up, it's any degree of folding or not, if you're sitting in a chair, is fine, right? But starting from the knees up, it's good to feel that the down pressure on your knees is as balanced as possible. So you might want to try. You can do this thing where you just press down with your knee, and without engaging any of the other muscles, except to just keep everything kind of relaxed, right? Just press down with your knee and see if you can find a place where the down pressure on your knees is as balanced as possible. It's not. It'll probably never be completely balanced because everybody's legs are, including mine, are differentially tight, but as balanced as possible. And then similarly, with the the tension in your upper thighs, like there's this thing, if you roll your right thigh forward, you'll notice your body rolls around like this. If you roll your left thigh forward, your body rolls around like that. And you want to, I I don't know about you. I mean, for me, sitting in half lotus like this, the the hip that always needs a little bit of extra roll is my right hip, because I think the half lotus posture kind of tends to push back my right hip. So try to move your body back and forth such that your upper body is kind of framed as straightforward as possible, right? Mm. And so that both of your hips feel kind of open and relaxed, and open and relaxed. And there's not sometimes over the course of a period of zazen, I develop a kind of kink in one sort of one side of this sort of cluster of muscles or the other. So just to notice that and try and have those muscles be as balanced as possible as well. Right? So we're going through this really slowly, but it's worth it. So, and again, those instructions are useful whether you're sitting cross-legged in seiza or in a chair, right? Or lying down, actually. In terms of your pelvic tilt your pelvis forward, tilt it backward. Find the place in the middle where you're neither kinking nor bowing your lower back, and where the muscles in your lower stomach muscles and the muscles in your lower back can feel kind of soft and lightly engaged. You might want to put your hands on, if you don't already have them, put your hands on your knees for all of this sort of body scan thing. And also try and get a feel for whether through the placement of your hands on your knees and the kind of sensing of the weight of your hands and the subtle differences in extension in your arms, try to see if you can locate your torso right in the middle, in between your knees, right? So later we'll do something different with our hands. But having done that, having adjusted your pelvic tilt, I would say pay attention to your shoulders. Your shoulders want to be, the energy in your shoulders, it wants to be out and down, and that should offer a certain amount of relaxation to your upper back. The muscles in your upper back should be even more lightly engaged than the muscles in than your lower stomach muscles and lower back muscles. They should really be allowed to just kind of hang there. And one of the things that helps with that is keeping the shoulders slightly back and keeping the energy of the shoulders out and down. Some of it is providing a little bit of lift in your chest. Not much. Don't strain it, just a little bit. And allowing your head to float back and float towards the ceiling, allowing your face to be vertical. You're famously, as it says in the, 800-year-old Zazen instructions, your ears in line with your shoulders, your nose right above your navel. Keep your eyes open and your gaze downcast and soft and wide. So you can really take in the periphery. You should easily be able to see both sides of the room quite clearly. And your gaze should include both sides of the room plus the middle of the room in this kind of unloaded way. It's not like you're looking at anything. It's just allowing the gaze to relax. So now put your left palm on top of your right palm. Bend your fingers around in a circle and let your thumb tips touch very lightly. Place that mudra up against your lower abdomen with the little fingers of both hands lightly resting against your lower abdomen. Gently close your mouth and your lips. Gently rest your tongue against the front roof of your mouth. And now that we've done all of this, just relax everything about one tick. Just relax ever so slightly and let your posture soften. It wants to feel lively and flexible and relaxed, as well as upright and ready for anything. Everyone's breath is, of course, their own, but it can help when you're sitting to give a little bit of extra emphasis to the out breath. In his Zazen instructions, Suzuki Roshi suggests you imagine it as a stone resting in your upper chest that falls toward your hara, towards the root of your breath apparatus, and presses all your breath out. Just falling by itself without any extra help from you. And then at the bottom of your breath, there's a pause. Really take that in. What's going on there? Sometimes very little. Sometimes nothing is going on there. And then on the in-breath, just allow the in-breath to take its own shape and depth. Don't neither hurry it nor slow it down. But you can imagine, if you like, that the in-breath comes in and climbs up the back of the neck. And softens the muscles in the back and the neck as it goes. And then lands right between the eyes. What should you be doing in this thing anyway? This Zazen thing. Well, it's easy to say nothing, but maybe that's not the whole story. Dogen, in his Zazen instructions in the Fukan Zazengi, says, and again, I think I've mentioned this before, and it's a quote. He didn't make this up. It's a quote from a much earlier Tang Dynasty Zen master, but he says, "Think not thinking." How do you think not thinking? And he says, non-thinking. Oh, and drinking some water when you need it. So here's an example of non-thinking. Maybe the better translation of the characters that are used for non-thinking or something like unthinking, right? You have to unthink. So the engagement in discursive, ruminative thought in Zazen usually happens on a schedule that you can become aware of through study of it. And in the middle of that schedule, also on a schedule that bears study, there'll be these moments in which your awareness returns to awareness of mind, awareness of body, awareness of breath, awareness of the proprioceptive sense, the auditory sense, the touch sense, etc., all of those. Usually those moments are brief, and I guess in everyday life, those moments are brief and pass almost unnoticed, unless there's something really particular going on, in which case that particular thing that's going on is becomes the center of attention. But what if there's nothing in particular going on? Or what if what's going on is sufficiently subtle that under normal circumstances it wouldn't bear examination, right? The request in Zazen is to engage it. So when thinking lets up enough so that there's this even cursory awareness of the body, the breath, mental activity itself, the senses, etc. To really ask yourself, or maybe ask yourself is even the wrong word, really become the question, what's going on now? What is it? What's happening right now? And a few things are helpful in that regard. One is to be compassionate and curious about what's going on. Compassionate because sometimes you're not going to like it. And sometimes you're going to think something else should be going on. So just to set aside those preferences and those likes and dislikes and just be compassionate and accepting with what's going on. And curious about what it actually is. And it's also helpful to know that the what's going on thing takes in a wide array of different processes that are operating continuously, including the process running in the domain of each of our sensory modalities and the process that drives our mental activity. Right? And all of those are essentially data sources, right? And to hold all of them in a kind of with equal weight, right? Obviously, some of your senses scream for attention more than others, right? Like you breathe in, I'm not smelling a whole lot in here, but maybe that's just me. But my sense of hearing is full of sensory information. But nonetheless, to hold them all equally. To hold the whole picture equally and not to bring too many ideas about it into the picture. To let to the extent that we can use these terms, let our internal processes and the external processes to which we're exposed as a result of sensing mix seamlessly and without preference or complication. And then the question is, what is this moment asking for? Sometimes it'll be really obvious. You'll have a pain in your knee, and it's that pain in your knee is asking for attention. It's the whole function of that pain is to ask for attention. Sometimes it's less clear, but to really make that a question and then let the answer be formed in the confluence of all the sources of information you have playing out right now. And to do whatever it is wholeheartedly and without reservation. And the good thing about Zazen is that usually, mostly what that is I'm going to sit some more. But there are other situations in life where something else goes on, but the process is the same. Right? That's unthinking. That's thinking about not thinking. And that's the heart of this particular practice, whether you're doing it standing or walking, sitting or lying down. Hmm. And it's just worth noting that if what the request at the moment is to subtly change your posture, to do something to relieve discomfort or tightness, then bring attention to the place where that discomfort or tightness is. Really let it register, and then deliberately take the action that's called for. I gotta say this first. Sitting up here, what it looks like is that all of you are floating in some sort of I don't know, maybe clear fluid, or maybe just floating in air at various heights. It's pretty great, actually. So here's what I thought we could do. What if we do a little bit of walking meditation just to freshen our legs a little bit, and then sit back down and we can talk about stuff. What do you think? Excellent. Maybe I'll keep wearing this. Cool. So yeah, why doesn't everyone sort of arrange yourselves in an arc? Because we're going to be walking around in a circle, kind of like this. Okay. And the idea is to plant your feet solidly, knees slightly bent, pelvis tucked a bit, and a little bit of tension in your lower abdominal muscles. Backs. Just because it focuses your energy and your hara, and it's did you ever anybody here ever study theater? Yeah, so I had this amazing theater instructor in high school named Whitney Haley. It was a boarding school on the East Coast, and he would always say, "Move from your belly," but what he really meant was your hara, right? And he was a kind of an older guy, and it didn't seem particularly healthy or fit or anything else like that. But when he would do it, you'd go like, "Holy cow, look at that." It was like he always had this powerful purpose to moving when he was putting that on, basically, right? So that's the idea. And then everybody turn to the left, and on the next out breath, plant your left foot a little bit forward of your right. And as you breathe out, let your weight transfer to your left foot. And then as you breathe in, you don't have to lift your right foot off the ground, but just kind of pick it up a little bit and get ready to plant it on the out breath. And then, repeat. It's kind of like your hara floating along, a few feet off the ground with this other apparatus attached to it, which is the rest of your body. All right, that's probably good. Let's sit back down. So before we do anything else, does anybody have any questions? And by questions, I mean questions really just about anything, or at least anything related to Buddhism, Zen practice, your practice, what we just did, et cetera, et cetera. Any of that. Go ahead.
So, how do you relate this practice to daily life?
It's a great question. So here's been my experience with that. Right. So you do this thing that we were talking about, this sort of unthinking, right? Where in the space that you carve out for yourself at Zazen, you attend to what's actually going on and attend to the largest possible in the moment picture of what's going on, right? And two things happen. One, you start to see that actually that mode of broad receptive attention has a completely different set of parameters than our kind of mode of everyday cognition, right? It's very much less concerned with self and other, and really almost any of the categories that we usually think in terms of. And it has a very different sort of sensory and emotional baseline than the kind of complicated emotional drivers of our everyday cognition, right? So that's the first thing. And you notice that usually, but not always, while you're sitting, right? But then over time, what you see is that mind starts to rise up and take its place in your awareness in the middle of everyday life, like, shopping, or having an argument with your least favorite colleague at work, or, et cetera, right? And it does it in response to experiential triggers, like, and you can even sort of train yourself a little bit that way. It's like you notice something, that you have a particular kind of experience, and just that awareness can bring this mode of being into play, into it essentially takes its natural place in your awareness, basically. So that's what I'd say, right? And that having that mode, having that mode arise and pass away. Maybe that's the wrong way to think about it. Basically, both those modes are ever present. It's just that our attention is usually focused on our sort of self-construction, rumination, everyday cognition, and so on and so forth. To have the attention wander freely between those two modes has a bunch of beneficial effects. One of which is that that it's almost always acts as a counterweight to the gravity of our habitual response, right? So, normally if somebody says something, some particular thing, you'll have a habitual response, and maybe it's an okay habitual response, but sometimes we have habitual responses that aren't particularly helpful. um, and um, and that this other mode, um, the emotional weight on our habitual response, it doesn't go away, but it's denatured in some way, and so all of a sudden other possibilities show themselves, which is lovely, right? So it becomes possible to go through life in a way that isn't so much governed by habit, the energy of habit, right? And then the so that's the sort of practical aspect, right? There's an aspect that's distinctly unpractical, which is that that mode of being invites experiences that go well beyond um, doing and not doing, good and bad, et cetera, that are where your body and mind turn inside out, basically, and where the maybe thinking doesn't drop away completely, but it certainly takes a distant backseat to the experience of whatever's happening in the present moment, which is marvelous, right? So anyway, something like that. Go ahead.
I was wondering whether you prefer inhale or exhale.
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, it's good not to have a preference, but in my experience with practice is that I've often heavily preferred the exhale, and it's not bad, although you can easily get into this thing. Maybe I've talked about this before, but you can easily get into this thing where you're like, I'm going to exhale now and it's going to be awesome. Right? And you breathe all the way out, and then you're like, it's so quiet here. And after about 10 hours of that, you're so anoxic that you start having hallucinations and stuff like that. So that's not very good. Um, the but it does make sense to the sort of standard yogic breathing that's associated with Zazen, more explicitly in the Rinzai school, but also in the Soto school, involves a subtle emphasis, at least, on the out breath. Right. So, but not preference. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I know what you mean, right? I would say you can learn to enjoy the inhale more if you do this thing like allowing it to massage your back and the back of your neck as you breathe in, right? Then you're like, I like that. But yes, there is something really marvelous about allowing and maybe even emphasizing a little bit the breath collapsing out of the body, and the way the mind often becomes quite still when the breath gets down about here, right? And if you like that stillness, that's fine, but it's easy to get stuck on it. That's all, right? Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
I had a Zen sit that I did a week ago
Mhm.
that was like psychedelically intense.
Nice.
I wanted to share about it and get your
Yeah, totally.
So I said this was like a bad acid trip. I was kind of in a monkey mind. I hadn't meditated for a couple of days, but I was also really clear.
Mm-hmm.
So My mind was wild. Memories, thoughts, nonlinear time ordering, perceptual fabrication through offense, multiple pseudo visuals obscuring the. So here there's a shift every 2 to 8 times a second with the overall vibe changing. Perceptual, investigatory, explanatory, anxious, fascinated. This was the bad trip quality. I guess I would say it was like I was looking through the quality of my mind, and it would have like a subtle narrative of what it was doing, like investigating or
Mhm.
fabricating or perceiving something or explaining something. It's changing like,
Mhm.
and but I was like somehow unabsorbed from that, but it was like making me queasy how much it was changing.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, I mean, in some ways that sounds, kind of like a mental tilt-a-whirl. That's not so bad, right? Are you familiar with the whole tilt-a-whirl thing? It's one of those rides that goes like, well, I mean, they're
It's like the amphitheater.
yeah, exactly, right, yeah. So, but no, I get that can be disorienting and so on and so forth. I would say that, I mean, everybody has to figure out how to settle that a little bit if you want to. But my experience is that if you get more yogic about your posture and your breath, that some of that settles a bit. Yeah.
I don't want it to not happen.
Yeah, no, I get that.
It was crazy how like intense it was to
Yeah.
sit, do nothing.
Yeah.
Know?
Yeah, no, well, that's exactly right. I mean, it's a total misconception that you're not doing anything when you're sitting. You're actually doing a lot, right? And it can be really you know vital and kind of marvelous, and it can also be disorienting and difficult, right? So but I would say it's only if you feel like you're drowning in it a little bit or something like that, it's possible to settle it. But I mean, all the stuff that you said, like nonlinear time, it's completely true. Like you have all these clocks running in your body and mind, and there's this process that heroically tries to align them all into a single unitary stream of consciousness. And if you really pay attention, you get this feeling like, oh wait, this one had to roll backwards a little bit and then forwards. It's crazy, right? Yeah. And it goes from there. You like, I think I've told you this story about in the middle of a 7-day retreat, sitting a period of zazen, and all of a sudden, snap! I was a basketball. I mean, literally this big, perched delicately on top of the zafu, and I sat there for 5 minutes or so, and then I sort of became my normal self again. Right? I mean, none of this stuff should be surprising, right? But it is. But it can be. If it can be. Discombobulating. So if it's discombobulating, then you can take refuge in the yogic practice of breathing and posture, right? And if not, then I would say, ride the tilt-a-whirl or something like that, right? And it's not always going to be like that. That's the thing. The other trick is don't get attached to riding the tilt-a-whirl, because there are going to be long periods in your career and practice where not that stuff isn't happening. And if you're like, and you might find yourself thinking, it was more fun when it was the tilt-a-whirl. But anyway, so something like that. Does that help? Or
Thank you.
yeah, of course. Anyone else?
Are we allowed to comment on other people's?
Of course, yeah, of course.
I've had a lot of intense experiences in meditations, long retreats from 10 days to a month, and I think one instruction that helps me a lot is relax and be aware.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like if you're driving along the highway, you want to be aware of the cars around you, but also the cars in front of you. So you don't get too attached to the cars around you if they're blinking lights or whatever, or maybe there's something that's happening in front of you or something exciting. But to kind of take the bigger picture and like by imagining sitting back more into awareness, like whatever fireworks are happening can happen and they can go on as long as they need to. But I have definitely experienced the, oh, this is entertaining, I want this to happen longer, and then I have nothing, none of the entertaining thing happen, and sometimes it's really dry and boring, and the like idea of sitting back and kind of letting the cars go by might be helpful.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, there's plenty of metaphors for it, but the fundamental gateway starts with awareness of the body, and then awareness of the full sensory picture, and awareness of the flavor, texture, and level of activity of the mind, right? And if you can bring that up, and engage with it in a way that's kind of unloaded and to the best of your ability, preference free, then almost anything can be met directly, right? And that's the unthinking thing that I was talking about earlier, right? So it's what time is it? It's MLK Day, and basically, he was in many ways the best example we have of a famous, recent bodhisattva, right? I mean, really kind of amazing, right? And what I mean by that specifically is this, right? So that the original ideal in Buddhism, or maybe not the original, but the ideal in the Pali Canon, which is certainly one of the earlier Buddhist scriptures, and maybe aligns more directly with a sort of earlier school of Buddhism. Although it's very hard to know about that stuff. But in any case, the ideal was the arhat or arhat, right? Who is someone who has essentially practiced sufficiently and um, and worked diligently enough with their karma such that they're not subject to rebirth, or, eventually when they die, and they're in the fruition of their practice, their attachment to the round of suffering and karmic engagement is broken forever, right? What happened, though, with the advent of Mahayana Buddhism, which my theory is that it had to do with Buddhism spreading out into Central Asia initially, and then into East Asia, and encountering cultures for which that ideal didn't seem particularly ideal, right? But in any case, the model for exemplary practice became the bodhisattva, and by comparison, the function of the bodhisattva was to practice literally forever, um, and work tirelessly for an infinitely long time to save all beings, right? To free all beings from suffering, right? And somewhere along the line, um, there this group of, and mostly three, but actually secretly there's four, um, uh, great bodhisattvas was sort of cooked up in the Mahayana canon. Um, and if you read, for example, the Heart Sutra, one of them, Avalokiteshvara, is the person that's doing all the, saying all the good stuff, right? Um, and who they're saying it to actually is an arhat. So there's probably a little bit of propaganda going on there. But, and I know I've already talked about this, but I thought I'd raise it again, right? Like those three plus great bodhisattvas who are Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion, um, uh, the Shariputra, the bodhisattva of wisdom and wisdom beyond wisdom, and Samantabhadra, the bodhisattva of skillful action, right? And they more or less are held up. If you study how they're described, what they're held up as is the sort of pillars of continuous practice. So, and the idea is this: and this is sort of what we were doing when we were sitting, right? But you enter the present moment, right? Here I am, present moment, and in order to enhance your engagement with the present moment, you bring up a mind that's compassionate and curious, compassionate both inwardly and outwardly, right? The famous koan about Avalokiteshvara, or in Chinese, it's Kuan Yin. These two guys were sitting around talking, they're brothers, and one says, what's Kuan Yin use all those hands and eyes for anyway? Because often Kuan Yin is depicted as having 1,000 hands, each with an eye in them, and some of them holding tools like carpenter squares and pens and all that sort of stuff. It's kind of great, actually. But anyway, and so his friend says, or brother says, well, it's like reaching back for your pillow in the middle of the night. And the first guy says, oh, I get it. And the brother says, okay, so what'd you get? And he goes, well, it's like all over your body, there, hands and eyes. And he says, that's about 80% of it. And he says, well, what would you say? And he says, well, it's like throughout the body, both, inside and outside, there are hands and eyes. Yeah, exactly. So bring that kind of compassionate awareness to the present moment, right? And then Shariputra brings wisdom, but it's not just the conceptual and the super conceptual. It's also something about this sort of intuitive engagement with what's actually happening. So to bring your conceptual framing and to hold that right near all the stuff that's happening in the moment. So all of the the interactions with sentient beings, like, for example, as we were saying earlier, your least favorite colleague, right? Or other non-sentient beings, including leaves and stones, right? And so on, right? So bring those things together and then allow that confluence to suggest, and the experience is that it just sort of bubbles up from your hara, right? Basically, suggest what you do next, right? And then do it without reservation, wholeheartedly, right? And skillfully, right? Those are the three great bodhisattvas in action, and they act in each of us when we practice, right? And the only in addition, there's this one in Sanskrit. It's Kshitigarbha, I think. In Japanese, he or she is called Jizo, right? And the characteristics of Jizo is decided she's really sticking around for the whole thing, and she's going to help everyone, right? So you drive around Japan, and at almost every crossroads, there's not that's not true, but in many crossroads, and particularly out in the country, there'll be these little clusters of statues, which are of Jizo, right? Who's there to help, whether you thought you needed it or not, basically. And so compassion, wisdom, skillful action, doing it forever and for everybody. And that's the practice. That's non-thinking. So I think we have time for maybe one more question about that, and then we should probably call it a night. But what do you think? And happy MLK Day. All right. Thank you so much for coming. It was great.